welcome to Generations at Work, where our goal is to build bridges and not walls between the different generations at work. Before we get started, if you want to learn more about how to lead different generations in the workplace, or perhaps you need workshop or coaching for your teams, you want to raise the leadership lid of your organization, please visit us at maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. Now, we also have an added value for you. We have created a downloadable free Generations at Work playbook. You can also access that at maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. I am your host, Susan Davis, and with me today, our generational expert, Dr. Tim Moore. He's the author of A New Kind of Diversity, Making the Different Generations on Your Team a Competitive Advantage. And you can pick up that book at maxwellleadership.com. Dr. Elmore, welcome. Welcome to the podcast once again. And I am super excited about today's episode as we are going to talk about communication, right? One of the most important things we can ever do. And let's just jump right in. I think a lot of leaders have noticed that as new employers are entering the job market, right, there are so many different styles and opinions about how communication should be taking place. Let's explore that a little bit. I'd love for you just to give us some information as we jump right on into this topic.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think anybody that's awake and breathing knows that every human being has preferences for the way communication takes place. And in the workplace, it's very, very obvious. There may be a Gen X boss or a baby boomer boss that says, this is the way we've always communicated. It's Slack or this or that. And a Gen Zer may come in with zero work experience. Maybe their parents all their life so far have said, focus on academics, focus on academics. So they're coming into a workplace and they're going, can I DM you, direct message or text you or whatever? And that may be fine, but I think leaders are going to have to be very clear right up front. This is the norms we want to have. I was talking to a human resource executive. And I almost couldn't believe the story she told, but I'm going to share it now. Yeah. She said she sent out a notice for all of her department that they needed to have a meeting on Monday to talk about some very important issues at 3:00. Her Generation Z team member emailed back and said, oh, that time's not good for me. Here's a link to my calendar. And if you can just see what might work, this is what works for me. And of course, this young man, bless his heart, had no idea you don't say that to your boss, that you don't say fit into my schedule rather than me into yours. So this is what we just need to talk about is nobody's dumb, nobody's stupid, but we just need to get clear lines of communication and find out what the norms need to be. Yeah.
I can see the boomers and the Xers and even millennials right now saying, what? How could this person say that? So let's talk about that. Why is this such an issue? Why is it such an issue of the different styles and opinions for how communication should take place?
Well, Susan, you and I have talked about this a bunch, even off camera. One of my theories that I think is empirically proven over and over and over is, even though the generation gap, that term, has been around for 6 decades, the gap has gotten wider between generations as the screens that are in our life went from public to private. So there was one screen in our homes way back in the day. It was a television.
Piece of
We
furniture.
watched it together. Yeah. Today, we're on this individual, personal, private screen. And so a young person is on different platforms than an old person. And my gosh, if there's 4 or 5 generations at work, they might be on 4 or 5 different platforms, obtaining their news, often fake news, etc. So that's one big, big problem. There's also another one I want to bring up, though. This is one that I think employers don't think enough about. There is a power gap at work, whether we admit it or not. I'll tell you a quick story.
Yeah, let's talk about that some more.
Years ago, our president at Growing Leaders, I still am the founder, but I was the founder and CEO, and our president had requested a meeting from Charlie. And Charlie was a wonderful, sharp, very smart young lady in her 20s, but he requested a meeting. And Susan, I have never once met a team member that turned down the president when he requested a meeting, but she didn't respond. She just ghosted him. And so he tried again in a gentle sort of way to reach out digitally, and then he called her and she didn't answer. So the next thing he does, this is a true story, is our president goes to our HR director and says, "What's up with this? I mean, I'm about to say, should I let you go? You know?" And she said, "Oh, she's just having a struggle right now. Don't press this. Just let it alone and give it some more time." He never did meet with her. And that was resolved in a different way. I won't get into it now. But the point is, there's a there's a democratization in the workforce right now where a team member might feel like they just don't even need to respond. I don't need to text you. I don't need to DM you or whatever. I had a young team member, Susan,
Wow.
not too long ago. This was within the pandemic period. I'm going to call her Yolanda. And there was a glitch. Something was said at a team retreat that she got very hurt. She got her feelings hurt.
Mm.
And I thought, you know what? I want to talk to her about this instead of talk about her. I want to talk
Hmm.
to her. She avoided me as best she could. I'd set up meeting requests. My assistant was setting it up. It didn't happen. And I'm thinking once again, I've never seen before a team member that was able just to avoid a meeting. And I'm not throwing any one generation under the bus, but I want you to respond to this, Susan.
Yeah.
There are generations at work now that don't understand protocol. I'm just warning everybody listening right now that might just respond in that way. I don't know how to have a hard conversation, so we won't have a conversation
At all.
at all.
It's the
Have you
avoidance,
noticed
right?
this too? I mean, have you ever seen
Yeah,
this with
I think, we do a lot of training around difficult conversations, how to have
Yeah,
difficult
yeah,
conversations, preserve the relationship, how to coach to high performance, use curiosity. But yes, I see more and more people don't want the conflict. They'd rather just say, forget about
yeah,
it, let's move on. But if you don't address it, it's always going to rear and come back
yeah,
up. You
it
know,
will.
this communication gap and what are some solutions to it? Like, how do we
Yeah,
get past as
yeah.
leaders? How do we get past this communication gap?
Yeah. The first item that I recommend, and I actually put this in the book, A New Kind of
Mhm.
Diversity, I talk about establishing very early on what are preferences, what are expectations, and what are demands. Now, let
Mm,
me break that down very rapidly.
yes.
Preferences are very soft. You're asking or you're communicating right up front. I mean, maybe in the job interview, but certainly within the first week or two. What are your preferences about the workplace? They might say, "Oh, I wish we had a Coke machine," or "Oh, I prefer this or that." It's not too strong. It's not a
Hmm.
a game changer or a make or break situation, but you might hear something and you might go, "Oh my gosh, we could do that." She would love that or he would love that. Not a big deal, but here's what I've learned. Sometimes a young, recently graduated team member can come in and express a preference as though it were a demand.
Mm,
After all, on social media, we're all conditioned to yell and scream with three exclamation points on
yeah.
that post, and it's unnecessary. But I think you did. I think we do well to say what are some preferences. You might be surprised with a 22-year-old compared to you and your age, what might come up. Expectations are a little stronger. When
Mm,
you begin to talk about expectations, you understand if they have an expectation or an assumption that something's going to happen, it could be a conflict. And if you don't bring it up, that conflict is going to brew and simmer and marinate and maybe explode 6 months later because you never talked about it. So, Susan, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it again. I've said it before. Conflict expands based on the distance between expectations and reality.
in reality.
Think about that again. Conflict expands based on the distance between expectations from that team member
Mm,
and the reality of our workplace. So I always illustrate if I tell somebody I'm going to be at work at 8, I show up at 8:07, not a big deal. If I show
mhm.
up at 9:30, we're going to have a big deal here. We're going to have a conversation. But it's not because people couldn't live without me for an hour and a half. It's because I created an expectation. So that's that. The last one, and Susan, again, I'd love to hear your feedback on this as a leader yourself. is talking about demands.
Mm.
I'm a little surprised. Now I'm old. I'm an old guy, but I'm surprised with the demands that new hires are bringing with them, old and young, not just Gen Z, with this is what must be. It's that whole
Mhm.
democratization of the workforce. They
Mhm.
feel like they're in equal footing with the boss. And maybe they are. Maybe the boss goes, I can't find any more people to take this job. I got to do whatever you ask because no one's waiting tables or whatever.
Yeah.
But demands are crucial to establish up front because if they make a demand and you know darn well we're not going to be able to do that today
Mhm.
or here at this workplace, you need to say goodbye right away, show them the door, and wish them well. So let me stop there and have you volley
Yeah,
back.
no,
That'd be
I
real.
think this is so good because I do hear a lot from the clients I work with that there are demands being placed. Like, I want to work a certain number of hours.
Yeah,
I need this. I need this. The big piece is, where is that coming from?
yeah, yeah,
Are we catering too much to generational preferences? Are we
yeah, yeah,
desensitized? Are we, where is this coming from?
yeah,
And maybe it's what you said earlier. They just don't know the difference. They haven't been
yeah,
taught this.
yeah.
And especially coming out of pandemic where things were a little wonky anyway.
Wonky. Yeah,
But,
it's so true.
why do you think this is happening?
Yeah, I do think this was evolving even before the pandemic, this gap, this
Hmm.
distance in communication styles, but it would just got accelerated with the pandemic. So my advice would be, this is just me, but I would say one, be very intentional about establishing communication norms in the workplace.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's the only way you're going to communicate, but here are the norms. That
Hmm.
way, all 4 or 5 generations present realize this is the deal. It's going to
Yeah.
be Slack, it's going to be email, it's going to be this or that. That would be number one. The
Okay.
second one, though, is I feel like because we're so different in our styles, we need traditions every week that bring us together and make sure we're on the same page. So for years and years and years, we did a stand-up meeting every Monday morning for about 15 minutes.
Hmm.
I know other organizations do this, but for us, it was magical
Yes.
because on Monday morning, as we started a new week, we stood up. We didn't sit down because the meeting will go on too long if you sit down.
Yeah.
But we just, this department, that department, what are your big rocks? What are your big priorities this week? Bam, 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 bam. It just, everybody knew what was going on big picture, and it established here's what all hands on deck need to be this week for us to pull off this donor event or this, big conference that we're about to host. We had weekly team time. This was
Yeah.
professional growth time. We wanted to practice what we preached. I highly recommend this because it's a great excuse to talk about stuff other than just doing business. We wanted to grow. And by the way, for years, Susan, for us, it was both professional development and personal development. I mean, we'd have different team members take turns, and one week we might talk about time management. The other week we talk about couponing and how
Yeah.
to make the most of coupons in your personal life. And it was so much fun. But it brought us together. It was a camaraderie building thing. We did lunch and learns. That's
Yeah.
very, very common. But one last idea I want to throw out, and then we can
Yeah.
move on. I have found that communication glitches can be remedied by a little exercise that I call the niche.
All
Ditch the
right.
niche. I know it's weird, but what I mean by that is because we all bring in different realities from different generations, we can get rid of our living in a niche in a little echo chamber if we get out and talk to each other from different generations.
I like
It's not
that.
always reverse mentoring. It could be, but it's more just talk about your superpowers, talk about what you love, talk about
Hmm.
what your norms are in your life. What are your hobbies? This, even though it may have nothing to do with selling the widgets that we're trying to sell, it really brings engagement together. And I'm telling you, when generations engage with each other, they're 5 times more likely to stay and 3 times less likely to quit.
That's so good. I
I
think
just want to
that
give a poignant
engagement,
pause there. It's huge when we engage with different
that
generations.
engagement data is so important. And
Yeah,
I want to just for a second, what you said about the meetings, the stand-ups. We work with
yeah,
a client in Canada. They do a weekly meeting, but they do daily stand-ups, as you mentioned.
wow, yeah,
And it is their growth, their retention, their
yeah,
communication. They're phenomenal, and to the point that I think it's so powerful. I had never
Yeah,
looked at those stand-ups as that powerful, and the team time. With that, I work with another client in Tennessee that we're trying to set the expectations of
yeah,
communication, right? And
yeah,
how we're going to communicate. And their feedback was, well, we don't have time to do all that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
again, it becomes you don't have time not to.
Yep.
If you
No,
want
you're right.
to,
That's
yeah,
exactly right. One
it's
metaphor that I have used before, Susan, you just made me think of it. Maybe I've used this before on this podcast, but I think it bears repeating. We teach leadership with images as well as
yeah,
laws, John's
yeah,
laws. But one of the images that I just love in regard to communication is simply called dentist and cavities.
okay,
And here's the truth. When you go to see your dentist and he or she looks into your mouth and says, "Oh, I found a cavity." Have you ever noticed they'll often say, "Can you stay a little bit longer and I'll fill it right now?"
yeah,
Or if not, "Can you come back as soon as possible and I can fill it as
hmm,
ASAP?" And the reason they do that is because they know if they don't fill that cavity in your tooth,
somebody will.
bacteria is going to fill that cavity. And
Hmm.
that's not a good thing. I believe people come to work, and based on the fact that we have multiple generations, we have different mental cavities up here that if they're not filled with accurate information and good communication, they will fill it with narratives that are not accurate, rumors, gossip, and they
Mm,
expand with time, just like that cavity can expand with
mhm.
time. So, leaders listening to me right now, can I give you some encouragement? You're a dentist. You're a
One cavity.
communication dentist, and people have cavities. And the bigger the narrative that could be out there, the bigger the
Uh-huh.
cavity, and vice versa. So I want to just encourage you, whether it's a weekly stand up like Susan just mentioned,
Yeah,
or I'm so sorry, a daily stand up, or
yeah.
maybe a weekly, find times. I have found it's very difficult to over communicate, particularly
Mm,
with the different generations that are at work today.
that's so good. You were talking about some of the gaps that are wider and the issues, and
Yeah,
and what sticks out to me is the demands, the expectations, the preferences.
yeah,
Should we be catering to those
yeah.
different generational preferences? Is that healthy, unhealthy for the organization?
It's a great question, and I don't know that there's one right answer, but I do think we ought to talk about it. You know how sometimes we hear the phrase, uh, every organization is filled with problems and tensions? Problems are something to be solved, tensions are to be managed. There's always going to be a little tension between sales and fulfillment, right? The salespeople are selling God knows what to that client, and fulfillment's, wait, we don't even have that product.
Mm-hmm.
I will never forget back in the 80s and 90s working under John Maxwell, he'd announce a new product from the platform. We had not made it yet. So, we're writing down notes for what John Maxwell told us. So, a couple of thoughts, and then I'd love to hear your input too, Susan. I think once you establish communication norms, it's totally fine to discover preferences and once in a while talk to that Xer where that Xer go like you, that Xer goes, oh, good, he understands me. He knows
Mm-hmm.
me. Or that millennial or that Gen Zer. But I do think it's important to have norms to say, if we're going to get on the same page, we probably need to be on the same page,
Mm-hmm.
which may be Slack. It's a digital page.
Yes.
But I guess what I'm saying is just like you got family members, maybe you got a family of five, you know what their preferences are. You know
Yeah.
that. In fact, let me say this. I've come up with a new image that I just love. I call it the gift factor, and here's what it basically teaches. Have you ever noticed when it's Christmas time or holiday time and you have a gift exchange? Have you ever noticed the people that are really good at
Gift
giving
givers.
gifts?
Oh yeah, and you pick them. Yeah.
Oh, you know that. Yeah. So in our family,
Oh yeah.
we do a gift exchange. We choose, we draw names, and
Mm-hmm.
my wife Pam might get, Ben, and Ben might get, Ashley May or whatever. But because we're a fairly large family, it's a better way to do it for us.
Yeah.
Well, we learned after 1 year, you did want my wife to get your name. She knows exactly what you want, and she'll probably spend a little extra money that she
And the
shouldn't have
bow
spent.
looks good. The package looks good.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah.
You do not want my son Jonathan to get your name. So sorry, Jonathan, if you're listening. But he'll wander into Walmart at 11 o'clock the night before Christmas and pick out socks. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm making this just silly. But here's my point. I think our leadership and our communication in many ways should feel like a gift where that
Mm.
person on the other side says, oh, he knows me. She knows me. And that doesn't mean you're catering all the time, but I do think our people, if we're leaders, ought to feel like we know them. And in that sense, I think it's once in a while, it's okay to just do that special communique or that
Yeah.
special note, jot them that and lets them know that they're special to you. Yeah.
Which goes right back to level two leadership, which is developing the
Yeah,
relationship and
that's right.
people answering those three questions of does he care about me? Can he help me? And can I
Yeah.
trust him? And
Yeah,
if we're not listening or giving them that gift, we're not showing help, care, and trust. We're not
that's
developing
right.
that relationship.
Yeah.
Great.
So I remember I mentioned just a minute ago, I started working for John Maxwell right out of college, and I still have some notes that he wrote to me
Oh,
from
that's so good.
40 plus years ago. John wrote a lot of notes, but this note, the three or four or five that he wrote to me in that period of time, I know he was communicating in a very special way. I felt very cared for. I saved the note, by golly.
Yeah.
But he was sharing in a very personal way, a way to communicate, even though we had norms back then at Skyline that we would, normally follow. It was just good to get that extra bonus. That's all I'm saying. So, uh, yeah, that
No,
was
it
nice.
is. I'm a big believer in handwritten notes. It's the
Yeah.
little effort that you take time to show
Yes.
that you truly
That's
care.
right.
And
That's right.
John's a master at it. Many
Yep.
of our leaders at Maxwell Leadership are. I love
Yeah.
that.
It's true.
Now, when we talk about communicating with our teams, with our staff, and different people,
Yeah.
what do leaders need to know?
Yeah.
What's best practices for that?
Yeah. A couple of thoughts I have, and I'm sure you've got some of your own, but let me just get the ball rolling here.
Okay.
I absolutely loved a book that I read a year or two ago, from Charles Duhigg called Super Communicators. And one of his big ideas is one that we all ought to know and practice. He says, when you're at work, especially, you need to know that people are going to have three kinds of conversations with you. And you need to decide or discern, rather, what conversation you're having with that team member. So here they are. Number one are practical conversations.
Mm.
These are probably the most frequent. Practical conversations are just that. It's just information being transmitted from one person to another. Here's our pie chart from last month's, or sales or whatever. But there's no emotion necessarily. Nothing's personal. Nothing opinionated. It's just practical. So you're transmitting information and facts. The second kind of conversation, though, is what he calls a social conversation. And what he means by that is you might bump into a team member and they just have to tell you what happened last weekend. If you're attuned, and that's a big if, you need to be attuned, Mr. Leader or Miss Leader out there, you don't need to correct them on the sky wasn't blue that day, or it's a social conversation. Let them just vent. Let them tell you what happened at Disney World or whatever. And maybe I'm exaggerating, but I have been so practical in my mindset. I'm ashamed of this, please. You don't, I'm not bragging, I'm ashamed that I will be, oh, no, that was Thursday, not Friday. It doesn't matter. This is a social conversation. Just let them flow and laugh with them
Yeah,
and ask questions about the trip. You follow what I'm saying. And
absolutely.
Susan, I'm going to be, I don't know if this is wrong or right. I feel like women oftentimes are just more natural at recognizing social conversations and flowing with them than guys are. I may get notes now from saying this, but I just feel like sometimes we're so practical that we miss when they just need to be listened to and loved on,
Mhm.
and we need to drop the fact was wrong on that last statement.
Good,
So
good.
anyway, the third one is the most important one for me to learn. It's an emotional conversation. And it may be about work items, but it's still emotional. And you need to know this is not a practical, this is an emotional one. Maybe it's an emotionally charged email that someone just sent you, and they did not learn that emails should not be emotionally charged. That's a face to face
Take a step
conversation.
back.
But it comes up, and you get maybe triggered as a teammate or a
Mhm,
leader, and you want to fire back out of emotion too. We tend to
mhm,
reciprocate what's been thrown at us, but I'm telling you, these are transmitting a feeling. And I need to, as a leader, know they're venting right now an emotion. They're feeling
mhm,
dismissed, unseen, unheard, and
mhm.
they're feeling it. So I'm going to real quick illustrate. And then, Susan, I
Yeah.
know you're both a good leader at work and a good mama at home. And this can be family issues, can't it?
Oh,
So
mostly a lot is, yeah.
my firstborn is Bethany. She's 36 years old and she's a counselor. She's a therapist and she's a very good one. But one time we were in the car together not long ago and we were talking about counseling. That was her industry. And she said, I got a question for you, Dad. She said, all things being equal, would you see a counselor about parenting issues that was actually a parent, him or herself, or it didn't matter, they had been really well trained and it didn't matter? Well,
Question.
I thought we were having a practical conversation. So I said, well, all things being equal, I'd probably want to see one that was actually a parent, that actually had firsthand experience. I had forgotten. I was talking to my daughter, who was not a parent, and she was giving people advice on parenting. And I just dismissed her. I wasn't
Get
even thinking.
emotional at that point.
Exactly. She got very quiet. She had her
Mhm.
feelings hurt, and rightfully so. I mean, I just missed it. But
Yeah,
you see, that was a misinterpretation from this guy. I thought we
yeah.
were having a practical conversation. It was really an emotional conversation. We drove into the garage. She said, I'll see you inside. She walked inside, shut the door. Well, by the time I made it inside, I could not find her. She had gone upstairs. I finally walked upstairs when I didn't see her, tears coming
Tears.
down her cheek. And I just realized she was talking to her father. And
No.
her father just said, I wouldn't see you about this issue.
Mhm.
So
Somebody
I
that she
ended up
was
talking
that.
to another counselor that I highly respected, and she said, Tim, you missed it, buddy. The right answer is, I would see you on every issue, Bethany. You know what I'm
That's
saying?
so doesn't matter what it is, right?
That's right, baby. That's
Well,
right. So
and then
anyway, I'm exaggerating, but go ahead and volley back on that. I,
I
I know
just
you understand this issue.
I think it goes back, and John says this all the time. People don't always remember what you say.
Yeah,
They always remember how you make them feel.
yeah, that's right.
And and I try to even tell my kids that, but even at work, it's so
Yeah,
easy for us to be so busy.
yeah,
And somebody comes in with a problem and you're typing, you're sitting here typing,
yes,
typing, and you're just like, I don't have time.
yes,
And that's an emotional response to people because they
yeah,
don't care about me. And then we have just cut that relationship,
yep,
which cuts down the communication, which
yeah.
just starts the whole cycle.
No, you're right. In fact, I just talked to a young lady, 27 years old, a very able professional at her job, and she had just lost her father
Mm.
and had gone to his memorial, et cetera, et cetera. So she's back at work. She gets a call from her boss. And her boss said, Hey, I was just calling to see how you were doing. She thought, Oh my gosh, this is so nice of my supervisor to call me and ask how I'm doing. So she proceeded to tell him how she was doing, how the funeral went, and blah, 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 blah. As she's telling him, she's hearing the click of a keyboard. He is doing email while she's
Yeah,
responding to him. Now, is it a crime? No, it's not. But is it a drop ball? Yes, it was.
absolutely.
The very heart. She was having an emotional conversation. Her father just died.
Yeah.
And he's thinking, oh, this is information. Oh, she's just telling me how, and he just missed the cue. So here's what leaders I want you to understand. I'm not a neuroscientist, but there's some neuroscience we need to understand. When messages are sent from our spinal cord up to our brain, it has to pass through the limbic system before it gets to the prefrontal lobe, where we can rationalize and
Rational.
reason. So we feel before we think. And that young lady, who was an
Mhm.
able team member, was sharing her heart about the funeral of her father. And he's doing email saying, Well, I'm multitasking, I'm listening. And I think he lost 5 points with his
Maybe
team
you
member.
probably lost more than that. You
Yeah, he
lost
probably
probably a
lost more
lot of
than 5 points.
loyalty.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, uh, just today, I was with a coaching client and working on his personal growth plan, and I'm going to ask your opinion on this.
Okay.
And two of his comments were number one, I need to work on my patience when things don't go right and how I
Yeah,
communicate.
yeah,
And the other one was when my day gets hijacked and there's
yeah,
disruption,
yeah.
I tend to be very quick, right?
Yes,
And I
yeah,
need to work on that. And
yeah,
you just kind of said people feel something before they think about it.
yeah.
How do we communicate And listen, this is hard.
Yeah,
This is
it
not
is.
easy stuff. But
Yeah.
how should communication take shape in this point of disruption
Yeah.
and conflict and
Great question. So I remember several times where we had disruption at our
Mhm.
workplace, not the least of which was the pandemic, precisely 5 years ago. Um, and I remember, thankfully, I remembered this. It's going through the limbic system before it's hitting the prefrontal
Mhm.
lobe. They're feeling anxious. Will I lose my job? Will this
Mhm.
pandemic go on and I'll lose my life? We were feeling hard things at that time. So what I decided to do was before we had our first Zoom meeting, I would decide the order that we would cover topics. And here's what I learned that absolutely worked, and I'm hoping it's helpful now
Write
for
this
listeners.
down, write this down.
Yeah.
Write this
Um,
down, leaders.
I had to remember I need to cover personal issues before work issues. And it's
Mhm.
not that I want to talk for an hour about their personal life in the living room right now at their, whatever. But I knew I needed to communicate, I care for you and your personal life so they could volley back, oh, good, so I can care for the work. I really do believe people need to hear, I care about your life. That allows them to feel empowered enough to say,
Mhm.
okay, then I'll do the business I've got in front. I don't feel like I'm the only one looking out for number one.
Yeah,
So personal before
so
work,
good.
personal before work, personal before work. You will get to work, but I think it's got to be personal first. Another thing I learned, Susan, was hard before easy. Hard before easy.
Why is that?
Well, the reason for this is everybody knows we're in a hard time. It's a time of disruption, right? Whatever it
Mhm.
is. They know if the boss comes in, hey, it's a great day. Let me tell you all the good things that are happening. They're going, okay, what are you
Mhm.
hiding?
Yeah, where's
What's
Bob?
not? I am too smart to think that everything's wonderful. Don't tell me it's
Mhm.
wonderful, Bob.
Skepticism.
So I think when we jump into the hard and say, listen, I got some tough news. I got some good news. Let's jump into the bad. They're going, good. Thank you for being transparent with me, Bob. I
Mhm.
need you to be. And now I'm more apt to listen to the good news and believe it because you weren't afraid to jump into the hard news first.
And
It
you
tells
built
them,
trust.
what's that?
You're building trust.
Yeah, you really are building trust by the
Mhm.
courage you're showing.
Mhm.
So this is counterintuitive because we all want to jump to the easy things first, fun
Mhm.
things first, quick things first. Go ahead and hit it hard first and then do it easy. The third of the three in this sequence that we need to cover in times of disruption is big picture before details. Big picture before details. Here's why. When we are feeling anxious and disrupted, we're feeling, we're not thinking yet.
Mhm.
And I need my leader to say, let me show you the box top of this puzzle and give you the very big picture of what's going on. Then I'll share with you your puzzle piece and where it needs to be played this week. Does that make sense? So
Absolutely.
here's the big picture of the puzzle piece box top. And now you know I'll go into if you share details first, they're going, wait, yeah, that's what Sharon's doing, but what about Todd? Don't worry about Todd. Don't worry about Sharon. Let's
Mhm.
get the big picture. Now here's your piece. So I'll stop there. I'd love
Yeah,
for you to
I,
volley back
I
at
I
me.
love this. My leader, Chris, if we only have 10 minutes, he always starts personal before work.
Yeah,
And
that's
and it's a way for leaders to model that you matter, right? It's
yeah,
always the law of connection. Leaders touch a
yeah,
heart before they ask for a hand.
yeah,
And so if you didn't get this, write it down. Personal before work, hard before easy, and big picture before details.
yeah,
I love that, creating that trust in that relationship.
yeah,
Finally, we're going to wrap this up with one last question. Of course, it's a great one because I think it encompasses everything. But what's the best advice that you give a leader on how to communicate with their teams?
yeah. Well, this is the best advice I've got. It may not be the best advice in the world, but let me just share it. So a few years ago, I wrote a book that I just actually talked about to leaders at the Indiana Pacers about. They were wrestling with these same issues. But one of the paradoxes, I believe there's at least 8 paradoxes that great leaders practice. One of those paradoxes is the paradox of being personal and collective. Now, let me explain. I believe the leaders that are able to communicate well are able to both convey, I see the big picture of what's going on at this company, but I also know your personal struggle, Susan, that sort of thing. So let me give a quick illustration that I think will put a cherry on top of this. A few years ago, I spoke at an annual company business meeting. I was the guest, so the president of the company spoke first. And in his address, which took about 30 minutes, he shared pie charts and graphs and the numbers and how they'd grown in that fiscal year by 22%. It was a great year. But I mean, as he spoke, everybody's listening, going, "Oh my gosh, I'm glad you're in charge. You are a smart man. You are a very smart man." I mean, that's the feeling you had. He spoke collectively. He gave them the idea, I get the collective big picture that we're all facing at this company. And fortunately, it had been a good year. But Susan, here's what he did next that was nothing short of brilliant. He finished his notes and he let us know that's the report. And then what he did next, and I'm going to model this for you right now. If you're watching, folks, instead of just listening, I'm going to model it.
Yeah.
He took off his glasses and he walked out from behind the podium and he said this. Now, I'd be kidding myself if I felt like I actually led this charge. Nancy, you guys in marketing, you crushed it this year. And last October, what you pulled off, blah, 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 blah. And he showed him he knew personally what they had done.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, you guys in communication, oh my gosh, I can't believe what you pulled. I could have never done that. And he told a story about Jason and his team. And then he did another and then another. He didn't get to all 300 employees, but he got to 4 or 5 of them, to the point that people, Susan, are now wiping tears from their eyes. He knows us. He knows us. And I'm thinking, this guy put on a clinic. I'm smart enough to get the big picture, but I'm personal enough to say, and I know this was a challenge for you this year, and you guys blew us out of the water. Everybody leapt to their feet at the end. The sound man leapt to his feet with tears running down. He didn't even work for the company. He's a professional sound man, but he's weeping because this guy communicated so well. So my advice would be, learn to be collective. Don't you dare let people know Sharon's struggle, but you don't know what the heck's going on with the company's fiscal, health. But on the other hand, it's so easy to be the boss and just share general detail, general. And people are going, does he or she even know I'm a single mom right now and I am really struggling to pay the bills? The best leaders do both.
I tell you, it's coming back to that relationship, the
It
empathy,
is.
the
Yeah.
how we're making people feel.
Yeah.
We have touched on so much. We could go so much more in communication. I want to remind people, if you're interested to learn more about this, you can pick up Tim's book, A New Kind of Diversity. What I love about this book, this is the book we use in our generational diversity team building workshops that we work with teams to grow their teams, is how do we take the different diversities
Mhm.
and make it a competitive advantage?
Yeah.
And because that's the thing, we all communicate different. As we started this out, we have this communication gap, but we all do something very well, right? And how do we use this as a competitive advantage for our organizations and our teams?
Yeah.
Such rich information. We appreciate everybody being here today at Generations at Work. Again, our goal is to build bridges, not walls, between the different generations. If you want to learn more about how to bring one of these workshops to your organization, or maybe you need coaching, or you just want to raise the leadership lid on your organization, go to maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. You can also download your free Generations at Work playbook. We are excited to be here. You can get this book at maxwellleadership.com, A New Kind of Diversity by Dr. Tim Elmore, our generational expert. We are so excited that you were joined us today, and we will see you on the next podcast.